let me open up a workspace first of all, and part of this is to show you galleries. Here is the open gallery within MapInfo Pro, and I'm hoping you can see on the screen there straight away things like tables, workspaces, all the rest of it are very pictorially represented. Interesting comment I'll make here, and I'm pretty sure I've got this right. If I open up a table, let me think of where I've got a table in my standard drilling area there, you'll find that this particular gallery will remember the last used file type. What that means then is if I want to open up another table, and I do that a lot, I can click on that and it'll automatically take me to the table opening dialog. If I want to open up a workspace, I need to actually hit the bottom part of this, open a workspace, and obviously then browse for a workspace as appropriate. Okay, so that's point number one, is it does remember, for certain galleries, remember the last use option, and that becomes the primary button type at the top of this. There's a professional name for what this button type is. I don't really care at this point, but just be aware of that. Secondly, the recent files in this are actually quite nice. It does list recent files as the old one did, but what it also does is gives you options as to how you want to open up those recent files directly from within this, rather than previously. I'm pretty sure there was a secondary drop down. So for instance, if I want to up assays in a map window, I actually don't know if that's map window compliant. Let's try another one. Isogeology. Open up in current mapper, and we have Isogeology open. If I want to open up a workspace, and this is going to take me off topic, but I'll do it anyway. There's my anomaly 2 workspace. There are no options for that because obviously it's a workspace. But what's interesting about workspaces in MapInfo Pro 64-bit, and I'm not sure if this happened in 15.2 or 12.5, I'm sure someone will let me know. Let me just check. There's actually a question appearing, which is probably unrelated to that. That's a good question, .so, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'll get back to you. .so was asking, I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong there, .so. He's asking, or she's asking, how Windows can be set up to open as floating by default. I'm sure there's a way of doing it. Honestly, I don't know, and I'll probably need to answer that one offline. My knowledge is not that extensive with the subtle options within this product at times. Workspaces. So if I open up a workspace, what MapInfo Pro 64-bit does is actually will close down all content in your window prior to opening up that new workspace. Previously, you could open up workspaces and you'd end up with all sorts of workspaces transposed over each other, ends up a real mess. So this does actually clean up the MapInfo Pro session prior to launching that new workspace, which is actually very nice. Now, I'll come back to workspaces. Again, I'm trying not to go off topic here. I'm going to mention something else. That's right. I was just going to open up another data set into, let's have a look, Isogeology. Is that a good one? Yeah, we'll open up Isogeology, and we're going to open this up into a new map window. Okay, so what we're looking at here right now, and again, bear with me if you know all of this already, but obviously there's a lot of users here who are not very savvy with MapInfo Pro 64-bit, if at all, is we've got the windows in tabbed view. There's a tab here and a tabbed here. Now, what I mean by tabbed view is there are 3 primary ways of visualizing your windows in MapInfo Pro 64-bit. The primary, the default, I think, is tabbed. As .so is asking, there may be a way of making them floating by default. What is floating? If I right-click on my tab, you can see there are 3 options there: floating, dockable, or tabbed. I'm going to make my anomaly 2 workspace environment floating. Oops, and it flicked across to another screen, which doesn't help you at all. There is my anomaly identification workspace opened in a floating window. Now, why this is incredibly powerful is you could sort of do this in the old one in certain ways. This actually has all of the ribbons, or sorry, not all of the ribbons. It's got essentially duplicates of the ribbons specific to this environment. In this case, obviously, it's spatial data in a map window. So we have ribbons specific to those, and these are the full ribbons from the main menu system. Again, this is obviously a minimized, well, not minimized, but not a full-size window. So you can see how some of the groups have been shrunk down. If I resize those groups will expand as we go. Again, that's the power of the ribbons. They do allow us to accommodate any window resolution, whether it's a tablet, a mobile device, or obviously a small laptop, and allow us to be a lot more innovative with how we work. The second good thing about these floating windows, and you probably caught it when I first did this, is I can then move those into a separate window. So it's gone off your screen, you can't see it, but you can see it off screen, half off now. This means we can actually run dual monitors very easily, and because these ribbons are actually in this window, I'm not having to come back to my other window to actually find the commands for it. I can operate in the secondary window with the commands within this window, if that makes sense. So that's second option number 1. Now, I mentioned that there are 3 ways of displaying these windows. The third way is docked. What I'm going to do is click on Docked. When I grab this window, you'll get your standard docking placeholders within the window environment. So what I'm going to do, just to change this up a bit, is position it over the top. Now what I have to do is position, just like the layer control, my cursor over the top of the placeholder icon I desire, which is going to be this one. And when I do that, you can see what I've done. I've now actually got two windows open in this environment. I've got my Explorer, which I'll come back to in the middle. I can now manipulate whichever window I like. One thing I'll point out here right now, again, I'm trying to keep an eye on my extensive list here in front of me. If you ever get confused, in fact, let me do this. I'm just going to backtrack out of here, and I'm going to add one more data set just to really make this a mess, because we can, maybe we'll try that one into a new mapper. Okay, so over here we've got a docked window by itself. Over here I have two tabbed windows in a separate docked window, if that makes sense, or a docked frame. One thing to help you out, if you ever get confused as to which window is active, there's a little yellow icon or a diamond. You can see there's no other ones there. So as soon as I change windows, the yellow icon indicates for reference which window is active. Obviously that helps, particularly if the window is undocked or if it's floating and it's in a separate screen on your computer. So again, that helps you keep control of stuff, this environment. First of all, right-click context menu within any map window is actually now incredibly powerful, particularly with this little quick access toolbar at the top there. So rather than having to dig around for tools, I've got a quick access toolbar up here that I've customized, and I should mention that without getting distracted here, I can actually click somewhere here. It's been a while since I've done it. Oh, here we go. I can actually customize the content of that quick access toolbar via this dialog here for MapInfo Pro Tool. So for instance, maybe I do save queries all the time. I can add that over to here, move it up and press OK. It is now over here up here, and I can obviously position that quick access toolbar above or below my ribbon. I would almost never suggest putting it below because it actually takes up more space, whereas if it's above, it's not taking up space. We've already got this header up here, we've got the tool search and all these buttons, so it actually makes a lot of sense, unless your screen's orientated differently, to put that quick access toolbar above there. So I recommend, and this is actually in our tips and tricks within the NCOM knowledge base, to customize that quick access toolbar with things like zoom and pan and all those buttons you use all the time. That way, regardless of which ribbon you're on, because you can see that they're open and close and zoom and pan is in some of these ribbons, but not all of them. And it gets annoying sometimes to try and remember where tools are. So having them centralized on the quick access toolbar is one way of accommodating that. A second very powerful way is going back to the right-click menu. On here, you will find pan, zoom, and various other things labeling are always on that quick access toolbar. So I can come over to here and very quickly find the select button, and it's always in the same spot, just like up on the quick access toolbar. So getting to know the right click menu, and in particular, the quick access toolbar up here, can save you a lot of time rather than trying to find stuff up on the ribbons or on the quick access toolbar. Other little handy hints. Down the bottom, and MapInfo Discover users have been doing this for ages. We've been right-clicking on here, and somewhere down here, I've actually lost myself. In fact, why can't I see it? There was a current mapper projection, but maybe my brain is befuddled today. There it is, projection info. So MapInfo Discover adds this button down the bottom there, which for every table within that window, as well as the map itself, provides projection information for each of those tables, etc. So MapInfo Discover has done that for eons, and it's obviously a super detailed dialog. MapInfo Pro realized that, and so what they've actually added is down the bottom where my cursor is, I hope you can see that, is the current mapper. So it's this yellow diamond. The projection for that is listed down here. If I change over to isogeology, we're in 6654. If I change a Darlow spot, we're in 8451. Okay, so projections for the window. So this is not table specific, but window projection is always down the bottom for the active window within the MapInfo Pro environment. So that's a nice little handy hint as well. What else do I need to show you? Dynamic labels. That could be useful. Let's do that right now. So I mentioned before the gallery options. If we go to, let's go back to here. We turn on labels. I'm going to come back to this Explorer window in a second. I'm going to turn on labels for the isogeology. Now, I think most people on this call, I hope, would know over the last few years, the MapInfo Pro team, with the inclusion now of much of the engineering talent from the MapInfo Discover team as well, have revitalized labeling in MapInfo Pro. So they've done a lot of work around there for logic that means labels can not overprint and all the rest of it, and that's fine. And in fact, that was great when that happened. Now, what they've done in these last couple of releases is integrated that with the gallery system in MI Pro. What I'm talking about is I've turned on labels, and obviously I'm getting my standard labels doing all sorts of weird stuff. There is now a labels ribbon, top right of the screen where my mouse is circling around. If I click on that, and for, again, my active window, which is the yellow triangle, there is now a gallery for label rules. And what this means is previously I'd have to stuff around with boxes in here and pressing apply and seeing what that does and pressing preview. The gallery system, and there's a gallery again, but this is a dynamic gallery. What I can do is simply hover, and you'll see immediately on the right-hand side of my screen, if you're not seeing it, what I'm going to do is actually, and I'll come back to what I've just done. This is something else I wasn't actually aware of myself. I'm going to hide that left-hand window and full size that a bit more so you can see. In fact, I might even zoom in just a fraction. No, that's a bit more cluttered, that's better. So what I can do is with the gallery, all I have to do is hover over each of these settings and I'll instantly see the result. I don't know if that one changed at all. That one definitely changes. And you can sort of see straight away, rather than me having to press OK and preview and reopening dialogues and all the rest of it, I can immediately see the impacts of these different algorithms and options on my labeling outputs. And this is starting to appear. Raster does it very well in a lot of places. So if I actually want to do something like this, that's actually a very nice way to label all of my rock types. I'm not getting overprinting. I'm not getting too much duplication. My font sizes aren't too small. I can click, once I'm happy with that, I simply click on that, and that now is applied to my label rules for that particular layer at that scale. So that's something else that's appearing there, and I'm pretty sure that sort of dynamic gallery appears in a number of other places. I'll come back to that within Raster a little bit later on, but just be aware of that. What else do I need to mention about that? I think that's more than enough. I'm not going to go into the interface within MapInfo Pro or even discover too much. You really need to get in there and experiment a little bit and find some stuff. I will mention right now, we have obviously fairly significantly changed up the way things are grouped within MapInfo Discover in particular. So you don't have your old data utilities, table utilities, object editing, which personally I struggle to understand why tools are in certain spots sometimes, because there are many of the tools in Discover that aren't really specifically object or data editing. They sort of do both and neither at the same time, if that makes sense. So those sorts of old groupings we've thrown out the window entirely and really group these in a very different way. So say the analysis tab is around the geochemical stuff, the graphing stuff, hydrology's in there, tenement creation, all the sort of stuff that helps you analyze and understand your data better, obviously with the exclusion of the raster tool set itself. Images is all of the image stuff that was under the old images menu that really made sense to keep together. And there's a bunch of other stuff. So drill holes and Discover 3D obviously all sit together quite nicely. But these other ones, there's pros and cons to the way they're organized. Everyone operates differently. We've done what we can to try and accommodate most users' point of view without losing track of what we're trying to achieve, which is to make things more intuitive on each of these ribbons and actually find stuff that you probably didn't even know. So an example that gets pointed out all the time is this one here, the unique identifier. The majority of our data, our client base, don't even know it exists. If you want to go through and actually automatically alphanumerically add unique attributes to a table, so sample numbers, I want them to be GHR 1 2 3 4 5 6. This tool does that for you quite automatically, and you can even start it from an existing number and keep on numbering from that, alphanumeric or numeric with or without prefixes and or suffixes. So again, the iconology, we hope, will also help draw the eye and people go, oh, what does that do? I didn't know that existed, and help you find new stuff that you didn't know you could do. Same thing with the query tool. Okay, let's leave that alone. Let's go to the Explorer tab, the Explorer window. Now, a couple of things there, something sneaky I did a second ago. The Explorer tab is, as I said before, a combination of the layer control, the table list, and a bunch of other controls that are all quite new, in particular the Windows list, which is separate to the old school layer control thing. Now, something sneaky I did before, you may have seen what I did. I had a window called Anomaly Identification open. I actually hit it, and the Explorer window can do that. What this actually means is it actually knows everything that was in that window. It preserves all that. But if it's getting too cluttered, you're trying to work on both, but you're obviously not doing it simultaneously, but you want to preserve this window to come back to in 20 minutes, rather than having to minimize it, hide it, get lost down the bottom, all the rest of it. In the Explorer, you go down to this window area here, and you can actually hide any or even all your windows. But nevertheless, those windows are all still listed here under Windows, under Maps. Okay, Windows also lists literally everything else open in MapInfo Pro. So if there are database connections, if there are tools open like Explorer, all of those are listed down here. And what I want to show you before I go too much further here is how I can declutter the Explorer, at least from my point of view. This is all, again, all subjective to how you operate. If your brain explodes, is this too much? That's entirely up to you. I'm just going to show you customization options. So to declutter this Explorer window, we're going to go to the Pro tab. Everything, configuration, options, controls, customizations is under the Pro tab pretty much. Go to the Pro tab. We're going down to options. And you'll see there we've got the MapInfo Pro options at the top, which is these three major rows, MapInfo Discover options and MapInfo Pro Raster or MapInfo Pro Advanced options down the bottom here. We're going to start with the Explorer options, which is pretty logical. Underneath here, I can choose to hide connections. I do want to see tables, maps, and windows, but that's entirely up to you. I'm also going to go into the window list and turn off tools. And what that should do is if I go back to the Explorer now, you can already see straight away I've removed all that guff down the bottom. Again, a subjective. If you use a lot of tools all the time and you want to know about those, feel free to leave those on, but that's just how my brain operates. Now, secondly, again, we've got nothing open. You might think, oh no, I need to create those windows from scratch or reopen the workspace. The windows are still here, they're just hidden. So I want to get the isogology back up. I want to get anomaly identification back up. Voila, they're all right there in front of you. Yeah, I'm getting a whole stream of questions here, guys, so I will have to come back to those because otherwise I won't get anywhere today. But I'll get back to them, I promise, at the Q&A at the very least. Okay, what else do I need to show? Yes, renaming layers within there is also now added. So within the isogology map, I can actually right-click if I get this right. The rename option, I think, has been pretty recently added to that. So just be aware again, MapInfo Pro is trying to position commonly used tools, not up in places you have to hunt around in ribbons and all the rest of it, but trying to place it specifically on top of the data type or the table name or whatever it is where you want to manipulate stuff. So in this case, you've got the data, the object or the target selected. There are all the commands I might need to perform on that, rather than there's a data type, I have to go to some dialog and then choose isogology from the dialog and then press an OK button. We're trying to put a lot of this stuff directly in the most logical spot, which is generally the right-click button on top of the data field of interest. The other thing I need to mention here, the other nice thing about Explorer is previously, and I'm pretty sure this is fairly new as well, but again, I could be wrong because I can't keep up with these things. The search function was certainly there for table list. It may have been there for layer control, but not for both together. So what I can now do is with all of this open, I want to find everything that's got ISA in it, wherever it is, if it's a window, a layer, a table, etc. I can just type in ISA, and straight away the entire Explorer has been searched and filtered to show me just stuff with ISA, whether it's in a table, a map, or a window, okay? And that, again, makes life a lot easier. What else have I got open? I've got anomaly, if my spelling is correct. No, that's pretty poor spelling, actually, but you get the idea anyway. If I was actually paying attention to what data I've got open, I'd know what was happening. Let's get rid of that. Copper Hill. Let's try soils, actually, and see what happens. Okay, there you go. Everything with soils in it in all three of those environments has now been listed. So again, the Explorer window, it looks initially complex. If you can, no problems, Jeremy. Jeremy has to leave us, but the recording will come through an email later on. So the Explorer window centralizes everything. No longer do you have to have 3 or 4 different windows you have to dock and keep track of. They're all in there. I strongly suggest spending some time familiarizing yourself with it. But as I said, go into the Pro Backstage area, clean it up to get rid of the stuff that you find too confusing. And I'm sure there's a few other options I haven't actually found in there. So it's worth spending some time, because once you get used to that, it's actually a very powerful little space to go and play. Okay. The next thing I want to look at is workspaces. So what I'm going to do is, I mentioned this, I think, at the start of this. If I was to open up, I've already got one workspace open, and I've got another data set open over here. Now, if I want to open up another workspace, I can go back to my, let's have a look, open up another workspace called contouring. As I said before, MapInfo Pro now, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's an option somewhere to overrule this behavior if you do like compounding your complexity in your MapInfo Pro environment by opening up 3 or 4 workspaces and then trying to work out which workspace you're trying to save afterwards, or maybe they don't. But for most users, when you open up a workspace, you do not want to be keeping other remnants from other workspaces or data sets open, because obviously when you go to serve that workspace, all of a sudden, all that other guff that's still floating around will become part of your recently opened workspace and will probably wipe it out and make a mess of it. So this will close down everything that's in MapInfo Pro and open up that new workspace. And this is just some guff that I've created for some screenshots. There is my quick access toolbar and some stuff in there. Now, why I want to mention this is workspaces. So number one, everything else is closed down and this data says opened up. Why am I not seeing stuff over here? I'm sure I'm doing something very daft. Because I've still got that on, which I assume clears. There it is. There's all the stuff to do that workspace. Number two, to help you out in knowing what you're doing, if it is a workspace you've got open, the name of the workspace is now at the very top of the screen. Okay, we've had that for many times. People get lost trying to remember when they open up the workspace, is that still open or am I operating on something else? Because MapInfo cleans out previous workspaces, they can now put that up the very top there. The third thing with workspaces is the commands for workspaces are also down the bottom here. There's a little, at the bottom right of the screen, there's a little pull-up, I guess. It allows me to save the workspace. Again, we've cleaned out previous workspaces, so we can now save that workspace over top of itself, but also there's a quick access option. So I want to go to that folder. There is the folder containing the workspace that I've just opened. And there's also a file path saver there as well. So all of those things mean workspace manipulation is a lot more savvy and smart, if that makes sense, within the MapInfo Pro environment. Okay, as always, one of my quick and dirty demos is going a lot longer than being quick and dirty. The last thing, though, that I want to look at is layouts within MapInfo Pro. And this is something I think most people have probably tinkered with a little bit. Very quick and dirty. What I'm going to do is open back up the anomaly workspace and close down that one there. Okay, layouts are now on a layout ribbon within MapInfo Pro. And I mentioned before that from our point of view, this is gradually and fairly fast replacing the old scaled output tool in MapInfo Discover. I'll show you some of the reasons why that is. But also, as everything MapInfo does, they take some of our themes, but they also implement it really well natively in their MapInfo Pro. And they also add about 3,000% more functionality than we ever had. So this is starting to look very nice within MapInfo Pro. And let me show you some of the capabilities in there. So what I'm going to do is, with the layout ribbon open, I'm going to go to New Layout. From my point of view, this is far too discrete, but that's my own personal opinion. New Layout at the top left of that. And what that will add is a new tab in here, which again, I can make floating if I want, like so. And again, the ribbons for layouts will be replicated, as well as the other spatial types of things. I can make that docked, or I can go back to being tabbed, where it was a second ago. Let me just shrink this down a bit. You'll see somewhere here, no, actually maybe not. Am I telling people? Yes, down the bottom there under Windows, we've now got both maps with anomaly identification and the new layout listed under layouts. Again, I can hide that if I'm not working on it as a primary. It is still there. So previously, if you had a workspace with the layout controlled, you opened up, your layout might have been shrunk down the bottom right as this tiny little thing that you can never find. You can now save your workspace, but keep the layout hidden like this, but it is still there if you require it as so. So to actually add content to the layout designer, what I'm going to do is go to this tiny little map button here, and I can either add a new map, or I'm going to actually duplicate the anomaly identification window I've currently got open. So I'm going to click on that, and this will add a new map window within the layout window. I'm just going to shrink this down a bit and zoom out a bit. And again, you're probably seeing all sorts of things that you could never do in the old version of MapInfo Pro. Move this, resize it, all the rest of it, and I'll just zoom back in a bit. Okay, bunch of stuff to talk about. Most importantly, what we've just done is created a new map window within the layout. Why that's incredibly important is you can see over here in the layer control, here is my original map window of anomaly identification. It's got a 1 next to it now. Go to the layout. we've got a second window. I'm going to double click, and you can actually see we've now got a second listing in the layout control, which is the content of this. What MapInfo Pro has done has been that age-old problem with MapInfo Pro that the frame objects in the layout windows were dynamically linked to the source map window, which I would be surprised and cause chaos and pain to 95% of the viewers on this webinar right now. If you shifted the zoom, the pan, the size of the original map window, your layout frame object was essentially a bust unless you've done a number of things to preserve it, including saving it as a workspace. So what this has now done is essentially duplicated that map window within the layout designer. And what this means is I can now come into this layout designer map window of that data set, zoom and pan and stuff around with that. It is completely unrelated to my map window. I can do similar here in my map window, zoom in, go back to the layout window, unrelated. Okay, so essentially it's duplicated the content into a new map window that is directly embedded in the layout designer, and this gives you a lot of freedom that you can do previously. In fact, you could close down this map window here, this other tab, it would have zero effect on this. You can actually still now come into this window within my layout designer and actually add layers if you so desire. I could find some other stuff and add it in there, and again, completely independent of the original map window. So it's resolved that old issue that drove most of our users insane, including most natural resources clients. So that's a big step for MapInfo Pro. It's obviously been around for a couple of versions now, but a lot of users have been hesitant to jump across to it. They've still been using the old tools. So I just want to show you that that does have that capability there. All right, I've talked about all of those things. Oh yes, I have already mentioned Explorer Windows layouts, that it is listed down the bottom here. Oh, you can also see now the second map window is also listed here. It wasn't there a second ago. All right, new features under here. So let me start with the older features. I think most people on this call, if you've seen any presentations around the layout designer and MapInfo Pro, are aware of the grid lines function, which was added a few years back now. So within layouts, what am I doing? I've got to think about this. Yes. So with that window deactive, and I'll come back to that comment in just a second, I can turn on snap to grid. And when I move that frame around, it'll snap to the grid lines, either left or right, depending which one of us is closer, or up or down. So you can actually see the top of this frame will jump up or down to proximity. So what this means is it gives you a framework for aligning your objects, you know, your legends, your title blocks, your overview maps, and all the other guff, your browsers that you're putting into this layout, and make it a lot more professional. You can obviously also add your own manual guidelines. So I could add a guideline here. I could add another map. I'm just going to do something like this. And let's see what disaster I can create. All right, I'm going to do this just for the hell of it. And what I can then do is with these two windows, and again, apologies if this is all very old school, or if you already know all about this, but for many people this is not. I can select those two objects and align or snap to left, and they will both align left, or vice versa, put another guideline to the right, or put another guideline horizontally if I so desire. And I could do, oops, I don't want both of those selected. Okay, I could do something like this and align at the bottom, etc., etc. And you know, if I really wanted to make a mess, I could do that as well and get them superimposed, excuse me. So look, that's been around for a few versions, but that is, you know, obviously a really good starting point for aligning stuff. Now, they've also taken this sort of stuff to another level. In fact, I think I'm distracting myself, but let me do this anyway. Discover adds a lot of stuff to MapInfo's map production that our users rely on quite rigorously, depending on your point of view. First of all, before I do that, one thing that gets a lot of our users, they come into this, they can move this around, but they don't understand how to get into this window. There are two ways to make this window active or to activate this window. You can either double click and you can see the blue highlight. As soon as you do that, you'll get a right-click context menu, which is all your standard map window menus. So that obviously then changes it from being essentially just, I guess, a placeholder graphic or whatever you want to call it, a frame object, I guess, into a viable map window. So that is how you switch between, let's call it frame object, for lack of a technical term, into active map window within this environment. Obviously, you can only have one active map window at a time. Now, why was I telling you all that? The second way you can do that is if I click on this, if your double-click speeds aren't very good and you find yourself double-clicking and undoing things, right-click on it, and there's an activate option there. And that will also bring up that blue highlight to help narrow that in that way. Now, the reason why I want to mention those is MapInfo Pro has implemented a couple of things that have derived themselves from MapInfo Discover over these last couple of years. I'm just going to make sure I'm going to the right place. Okay, the first one is with my map window active. I want to add some gradicules or grid lines. If I go to the map window, this one here at the very top of the map ribbon is called grid lines, and this is new for 15.2. It's still got a little bit of work, but it's actually looking pretty good compared to what it was when I first looked at this many months ago. So it's a really nice implementation, and again, totally derived from Discover's gradicle or map grid tools. What I can do is click on grid lines, and in this case, I just want to use whatever projection the window is, and I'll leave it with those default numbers. What that will do is add some grid lines in there, and you go, whoop-de-doo, MapInfo Discover can do that. It can, but it can't. MapInfo Pro takes it a whole lot further. So number one, this is embedded within this map window within the layout designer. It's dynamic. I can zoom out, and it's going to redraw, and it's part of this. Now that's MapInfo Discover can sort of do that because we've got the dynamic grid and the map grid, which is a static version, but it's still not as good as this. The second thing that you may have observed is once I've pressed that, I've added those grid lines to this map window within the layout. There is a new grid line layer over here within the layer control for this particular map window. As soon as I click on that, you may or may not have noticed that there's a new ribbon up the top at the far right here called grid lines. If I click on that, this has a whole ribbon specifically around customizing the map grid or map grid lines interface here. Discover did not have anything like this wealth of options. So very quickly, I can come into this, change the color of those to red dynamically. I can probably change the size. I really haven't actually played with this too much. You can control the orientation of these to your heart's content. You can make these horizontal or follow the lines. I could go on for hours. You can add another grid line up the top left here. So I want lat long over the top of this. I'm going to change the projection to be lat long. Click on that. Immediately another set of lines appears with all sorts of guff. There's another layer under here. I click on that. There's the ribbon for that. I'm going to change these to be red. Oh, I've lost my grid lines. There we are. I'm going to change these labels to being red, like so. And voila, and I'm sure there's a way of changing the line style itself, which I haven't actually had a chance to click on yet. So I'm hoping you can see why this takes the MapInfo Discover map grid and dynamic grid to a whole step further. It's part of MapInfo Pro. It's native. It gives you a myriad of options you wish you had in MapInfo Discover over these last few years. I'm pretty sure the one thing it doesn't have, and I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, is Discover has a very popular option, which is to put basically a grid mask around the extremities of this window in which it places the text labels, because a lot of people don't like text sitting over the top of their data. They want a nice opaque white buffer around the outsides, put the grid line labels in there, and that's nice and clear. I think that is on the roadmap. It's certainly very popular. I could be wrong, and maybe it's in here somewhere that I haven't seen it, but just be aware that that option is already there in the layout designer for doing really nice grid lines, and they're a part. So you can always come back, unlike Discover, and dynamically update those. You don't have to regenerate the layer each time like you do in Discover. The other thing I need to mention under here from Discover is under Change View. So this is with the window active. If I change view, MapInfo added a drop-down, I think I've already mentioned this previously today, of presets cartographic scales. This was a very popular part of Discover's scaled output. I want to set this window at some predetermined scale. Rather than having to type in numbers each time, I can do so, and voila, that is done. What I'm going to do is fairly quickly run through some of the options that you may or may not have seen. So first of all, I'm going to open up here a Landsat image that I've already processed, and I'll come back to how I did in a second. So raster is loaded, as I said, with MapInfo Discover Bundle. There is the raster tab there. We have what you would call the old grid utilities in Discover, a subset of those. And as I said, there's about 3 or 4 more I'm aware of, including the volume tool, I believe is coming in the next version of MapInfo Pro Raster or MapInfo Pro Advanced. Interpolation options, I showed you just a second ago. What else? There are your tools. So for this raster or this Landsat, I can very quickly pull up stats over here, and you can see, unlike the old Discover tools, these are all docked. These are all native to MapInfo Pro. So you don't have floating windows everywhere. You don't have the problem with some of the old Discover tools where you got a dialog open, you've got to close it in order to access another tool. They're all windows, and they're my Pro. I can dock and manipulate things to my heart's content. So there's my statistics. I can pull up a cell value tool and click on here, and you can see now I've got 2 tabs, and I think I can make these. I can. I can actually make these floating. So there is my grid stats. I can actually make this dockable, I think it is. And let's see if I get this right. And do something like that. So there is now my grid stats for this whole grid. There is my cell value tool. I can pull this up and I can quickly click around and see in real time the values of that grid. And again, you can see how neat and organized that allows me to be within the MapInfo Pro environment. So I'm just going to get rid of that. What I want to show you is a couple of things without getting too sidetracked. So color shading. I'll come back to this one later on. In fact, this is the one I'm after. Let me just show you some of the things you can do with this. First of all, real-time coloring. What am I trying to do? I'm not trying to do that at all. I'm going to convert that to pseudo color. The gallery thing I showed you before. Let me show you that in raster. We've got a range of color displays. I can hover over any of these and immediately see the coloration being transposed onto that raster or that grid file there in the background. Okay, again, that was that gallery concept, but it's being shown in real time. So in Discover, you'd have to click on each one, press apply, change it back, all the rest of it. With the gallery controls in MapInfo Pro, it's real-time previews, and that's pretty powerful. And this is actually about a gigabyte file size. So it's not a tiny file size that's being processed here in the background. I should mention that's part of this whole MRR thing. That is 1 gigabyte file. Let's get this up. Pull up my trusty pan tool. Discover would not be able to process 1 gigabyte of grid in the background, anything like as fast. And a lot of that is because of the pyramiding controls within MapInfo Pro raster. Okay, hill shading as well. Again, dynamic hill shading. So if I'm trying to control sunshade, angle some sunshade, again, real-time previews through a very powerful gallery concept. If I want to go advanced, I can take this to another level. I can get a window here and I can start manipulating individual bits in real time. Again, think about that. That's 1 gigabyte of data being processed in real time. Discover, again, would struggle to do that. I do remember quite literally doing it with half file sizes of this, and there would be quite a meaningful lag between me pressing buttons and actually seeing that being applied to the preview there in the screen. So that's some of the pretty powerful components at the very basic level of this sort of stuff. Now, something else I want to show you. Again, I'm just going to move through this fairly fast, so bear with me. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm going to open up my Darlow data set. Let's get out of this. Nope, I want to go into here. Darlow. If I can see Darlow, there it is. I'm going to open up another grid. I'm going to close down the visibility or hide that window there. So something else we've had a lot of requests for over the years is contouring as regions. Now, Discover surfaces could do this in a roundabout way. I think if I recall correctly, you would classify a grid and then you would extract them as vectors. There were 2 or 3 tools you had to chain up, and they never got you quite the same results as contouring did. So without going into too much into the tools within here, there's a lot of tools in here. I'm going to go to the contouring tool, which is here. And again, you can see the graphics help you understand where the tools are. Contouring opens up here on the right. You've got your standard options there, which I'm not going to touch on. I'm going to go to region, custom intervals, and because I'm a smart cookie, I've actually previously created an appropriate level file for this particular thing to save myself a whole lot of pain. Now, there's a little trick in here that I found actually today that I need to turn off. It's this one here. Otherwise, it introduces some problems, and they are resolving that as we speak. I need to reload that data set. So yes, that workflow I just showed you was a bit odd and has already been identified by myself, and they are addressing it. I'm going to load up these color settings. And as I said, this is going to be regions, not polylines. So now process that. You can see the taskbar at the bottom. Voila, we have, instead of being contours, I can't find the tool I'm after, so I just go to the quick access toolbar, and we have regions being displayed. And as you'd expect, if I find my trusty info tool, which is the one tool I can actually never find for some reason, and particularly as the window pane pops up in an odd spot, you can see each of these regions over here have bounds as per this display here. I can obviously then use these contour regions for further selections of other data types. So maybe I'm trying to find flood risk. You know, maybe this, just going out natural resources, but maybe this is a terrain model. We're trying to find elevations at a particular risk height. I've then got a building infrastructure plan underneath that. So I'm using that polygon to find me all houses, find myself all the houses that are at risk of a particular flood event. I can use that polygon to do my selection, and hey presto, I can now go and do a leaflet drop or a door knock from the SES or whatever it is to tell those particular house owners that their houses are at flood risk. That's one example. Obviously, within natural resources, there's a wealth of different ways you could manipulate contours as regions in a practical way, and I'm sure many of you already do. Okay, the third thing I want to show you, I am working through a list here. is multi-band Landsat import. So let me close everything down. I'm just going to work through this fairly rapidly. Again, apologies. There's a lot of stuff to show you, and I'm sure most of you are probably appreciating that. There's actually a very detailed, where are we here? Let me just get my browser open here. There's a very detailed, it's not that one because that's what we're doing right now, data article within Tom Probert's monthly MapInfo Pro Journal that actually talks about how to download and implement Landsat data. I'm going to show you some of the concepts in there. So what I'm going to do first of all is talk about very quickly, if I can get it back again. You can download Landsat data through the Earth Explorer USGS website, which takes you through using a location, in this case South Australia, obviously, choosing the right dataset type. I've got Landsat archive for L8 and various parameters set up there. You can set up all sorts of additional bits and bobs, and it will then give you, in fairly rapid succession, a list of tiles or imagery appropriate to you. You can click on each one of those and it should actually show you the footprint, and obviously a C footprint ain't going to help me a whole lot here. But that's very easy to download Landsat data. The data that comes out of that is actually individually banded. So what I can do is show you, if I'm going to the right spot. Have I gone to the right spot? No, I have not. We're doing a presentation, 2000.2 data, here we go. The data will come out from the download site looking like so. You can see the various bands of the Landsat 8 data set here. We're going to use the first 7 bands, and you can see each of these is 115 megabytes thereabouts, except band 8 is about 500 megabytes. So if you need to bring in Landsat data, whether it is, as I said, you're doing vegetation studies, fire impact studies, geological studies using whatever bands it is that you wanted to use, that's a good place to go in the first place. Now, to bring that into MapInfo Discover, the tool we're after here is Combine. On the raster tab, what I can do is basically browse to that location I just showed you, which is where I've downloaded the data to my local drive. Select the appropriate bands I'm bringing in, and they will now be listed in order. I'm going to make sure I bring them in the same order, so B1 to B8, like so. And I've then got a range of ways of importing those. So in this case, I'm going to go bands of a single field. Now, I'm no expert on this sort of stuff, but it is possible bringing each band as a separate field, or I can actually do custom mappings. And what this means is I can actually combine different bands into different fields. So maybe there's 2 specific bands I want in one field, another 3 bands in another field. I can do that to my heart's content if I'm an expert photogrammic interpretist or analyst, like Chris Jenkins over in the UK. Within PB. I'm going to do bands of a single field, and I'm going to turn off this option here, which I'm not really sure I find that intuitive, which will actually preserve the native names of each of these as the band names over here. I'm not going to press OK because this took, I think, I've got it written down here and I've probably lost it. It actually took 70 seconds, 7 bands, totaling about 2 gigabytes of Landsat data, took about 70 seconds to produce a 700 megabyte multiple resolution raster file. So you get the idea. I'm going to show you instead what the result of that was if I can open it. We did have it open just a second before, which was called this one. So this is the data set that was produced out of this. Now, to show you what I can do with this, if I go to raster, I'm going to go to the advanced color option straight away and cheat a bit. Let's see, is that what I really want to do? No, actually I don't. What I'm going to do is, I was showing this in pseudo color before. This is now going to be handled as an RGB. So I'm going to flick it over here. And by the way, there's only one field. You remember I actually brought in all 7 or 8 bands into one field. There's only one field listed. Go to RGB. Once I've chosen RGB, I can then go to this bands function. And under this bands function, I can either custom map my various bands to the RGB channels, but raster also comes with some very powerful predefined templates. And again, this is a gallery view, so I can basically hover over any of these templates and immediately see the results. And you can see why that is so much easier than having to press OK each time to see the result. So if I actually shrink this down, depending on what you're into, you can very quickly start playing with your Landsat and discerning what it is, whatever it is that you're trying to acquire out of there. So that's obviously some pre-map ones. I'm pretty sure we will be adding more templates to there. I don't know, but I would assume that it's quite easy to add these in the back end. Let me just revert this to that one. So you can certainly do that sort of stuff. And that is obviously very savvy for those of you who are into this sort of stuff. The second thing for even more advanced users is the advanced color option, which opens up its own docked native environment over here. You can see that last template I chose has already been mapped here using band 6 for red, band 5 for green, and band 4 for blue. I would presume that if I change that to be a different one, yep, you can see the bands changing over there straight away. So that's component number one. Number two, if I go over here, this is currently mapping them individually in the transforms. I can map all channels and start seeing how those channels are distributed in terms of data ranges down the bottom here. And I can also start playing around with the transforms and getting those sorts of outputs. So I'm hoping you can see, and that's about as much as I want to touch on, that if you are into multi-band analysis, whether it's Landsat or other sources, Arsterdata, whatever it happens to be, or Astrodata, this is a very powerful technology that we've implemented in MapInfo Discover 64-bit, and obviously MapInfo Pro Advanced in particular. We're hoping that that will really help a lot of our users to start getting a lot more out of their data. We've had so many requests for RGB and more advanced versions thereof for many years, and this has certainly tickled a lot of people's interest over these last 12 months. So have a play with that if that's somewhere you play. I'm going to leave that alone. All right, last little exercise. The other thing I want to show, which may be more of benefit to many of our users, is I'm going to get rid of this stuff. So I'm hoping that's got some value out of some of you, is more generic types of stuff. So I'm going to open up from here. I've got some isogeology, and I've also got, if it didn't keep on flicking, I've got that ribbon switching thing turned on, which is driving me insane already. Somewhere here I've got some, where is it? Maybe it's not there. Maybe I need to open up some data. Bear with me, I've got a geochemical data set that I have previously created, as always. I'm in the wrong spot again, aren't I? Sorry, this is what happens when you put stuff all over the shop. That one there. Okay, so look, this is a fairly common example that I use all the time. In fact, we use it in training courses, but I do want to mention here why this is important. So we have, let's call it a geochemical map of copper values over the Mount Isa region. Let me turn some transparency on for that so we can see through that. Excuse me. Also underneath there, we have Mount Isa geology. Now, I want to bring this back to the grassroots level for a second here. You're a geologist or a greenfields geologist. The example I'm about to give you is probably total rubbish, but the concept is probably appropriate. You've identified that doleritic units are particularly exciting from your point of view for your particular mineralization type. Now, also from your research studies and from your geochemical mapping, you're looking for copper values above some certain threshold. Let's call it 40 ppm in whatever that we've done here, soil sampling. Probably total garbage, but again, concept is what I'm looking at here. Now, traditionally, what you might have done is you might have done a query to rip out all the doleritic polygon vector units. What you then probably would have done is some kind of grid query or a calculator tool to pull out all the regions of copper values above 40. You would have then probably converted that into a vector data set. So you would have then been sitting on two vector data sets, one of geology or a subset of this geology, another one of a vector subset of this. You've got two vector data sets that are spatial. You would have then, with a bit of pain, shoved that into MapInfo's SQL query select, and done some kind of join operation or combination option. So where geology intersects the copper 40 or vice versa, where it's contained within, something like that. And I think most of you are probably aware that that was a little bit painful, the logic there. More importantly, you're dealing with two vector data sets. Vector data sets are not efficient things to handle. The whole point of MapInfo raster, or sorry, I should not overstate that, a very significant part of MapInfo raster development was to implement a much more powerful method of dealing with all of your data. And I'm putting emphasis here on all of your data. We're looking at vector data for your isogeology. I'm going to show you a different way of approaching this by converting or rasterizing this vector data into a raster, MRR format, and then doing the process I just described as a combination of two rasters, which are so much more efficient and powerful and fast than trying to do on vector data sets. And this is particularly true when you start getting up to high resolution continental scale data. It is just almost obscene to try and do this sort of work on vector data. It is just so inefficient and slow. So what I'm going to do is rasterize the isogeology. And there is this button here up in the raster ribbon called rasterize. I'm going to choose isogeology, choose the value from the from column, and I'm going to use map symbol. And you mentioned previously, I mentioned how MRR supports both numeric and classified data. We're about to create a classified raster output from this. The rest of the stuff is not too important. Let me turn off that. Let's just press process and see what happens. Now, what this has done is I'm just going to make this a bit more transparent. so we can actually see, and there's a reason why I've done this fairly coarse. Some of you are probably going, Alex, the resolution on that is appalling. There is a good reason for my madness. Let's try 35%. Yeah, it's still probably not as transparent. It's probably too transparent. I'm hoping if I zoom in, maybe you'll see it better. Zoom. Okay, you can probably just see, I'm trying to work out what I need to be making more transparent. All right, there is my rasterized grid of the isogeology. You can sort of see it's fairly pixelated compared to the line work. So what I'm going to do is change the cell size over here. Now, those of you who know surfaces well enough and discover, I've always said as soon as you halve the cell size, you're increasing the number of cells by a factor of 4. Your grid size is going up by a factor of 4. The processing time just grows and grows in relation to that. It's basically a square thing going on each time. I'm actually going to change that down to 50. So that's a factor of 4 downwards. So that's 16 times, I think it is, the number of cells. Nevertheless, you'll see how fast processing was of that compared to surfaces. And if we actually turn off the geology, you can start seeing that the resolution of this rasterized vector data, if I use the cell value tool, you can actually see what I'm talking about. If I turn this on, have a look over here, I'll get the right one selected. You can actually see the attributes are not numbers, they are actually characters or strings. As I click around, click out here, we're getting PJ keys and PAs. I've now converted what is a very traditional vector data set into a 50-meter cell-sized raster map. And again, I could keep on playing with the cell sizes. I could go as fine as I want. In fact, let's just do it for the heck of it. I'll probably regret it for some reason, I'm sure in a minute. You can see the processing happening down the bottom here. So it is slower, but it's not the end of the world, but it's probably getting a little bit long for the timelines of this presentation since I am already 30 minutes overdue. But you can now start seeing the fidelity is almost one-to-one between the original vector data and that rasterized grid. Now, let me leave it there. What I'm going to do is, sorry, not let me, I'll leave that example. I'm going to take it back up to 50 because I do want to do some further processing and I don't want to curse myself with a very large file size. What we're now going to do then is get rid of the geology. In fact, we can close that geology. We do not need the geology anymore. Close table. We're going to take the geochem, which is still sitting over the top of there, and we now want to highlight all copper greater than 40 parts per million, or whatever the units are of the grid, as well as any doleritic units within the rasterized geology, and basically return the intersection of those two. So what I'm going to do is get rid of both of these dialogues, just to clean up my space, pull up the grid calculator, or the raster calculator, I'm sorry, within the raster tab. And I'm going to cheat here a bit because we are obviously on a timeline here. I'm going to load up, I've got to think about this, where have I put it? There it is. I think they call it a reference, I'm not really sure. A little calculation I created earlier. Now, the way this works is it's actually, unlike MapInfo SQL stuff, it's a whole lot smarter nowadays. It allows me to create inputs and outputs, or inputs and variables, to populate a predefined expression with. So what I'm going to do to help you clarify is, obviously enough input 2 is going to be greater than 40. That's going to be my copper grid. So copper grid is this one here. Down the bottom, input 1 is obviously some kind of string data set, which is going to be my rasterized geology. So this will automatically take input 1, which is the raster data set, put it into here, and put the copper data set into here. The condition is basically a where condition, where the the copper grid is greater than 40 and the attributes within my rasterized geology is any of these specific units of interest. Return me a result, and my output grid will be the input 2 grid. So wherever these hold true, return me the results of input 2, which is the copper grids. I want to know the copper values over the doleritic units of interest there. If that condition there fails, return a null. I'm hoping that's pretty sensible. The only thing I should mention, and I've been learning this one myself, is the I guess the output grid in terms of size of grid, in terms of cell sizes, and again, I could be slightly wrong, but I think this is the general idea, is defined by this gold star. See that primary grid thing there? I need to click the copper grid because I really want my output grid to honor all the aspects, the parameters of that geochem grid. So I put the gold star or the primary grid button there. I believe that is actually quite important in almost every tool within the raster tool. So if you are playing with this, please pay attention to that primary grid because that controls a lot of things that I wasn't quite aware of myself. I'm going to leave that the way it is, and let's see what this does. Okay, what I'm now going to do is turn off that, and you should see, maybe I can actually make this a bit more invisible, that we'll get I'm hoping that's still a bit too opaque for my liking. Let's wind that way down. Okay, much better. So you should now see that we've got specific dollar-etic units. I've still got the info tool turned on. And I'm now seeing copper values for grid 1 of greater than 40, where the underlying unit is a DO. So I'm actually seeing 2 grids being listed here with the info tool. I've seen a few people asking why doesn't the MapInfo Pro standard info tool support rasters like the old 32-bit does for discovered surfaces. It's because of the complexities with this sort of stuff. It just can't handle things like multiple cells, whereas this one can. So there is a very specific info tool, this thing here, or the cell value within raster, that is designed explicitly for the raster tool, and you can sort of see what it's done here. So now we've generated a target map of particular regions with appropriate copper values. Where is it there? Appropriate copper values, and the underlying geology is obviously one of those dollar-etic units that I was targeting in the first place. So that's my last little example. I did want to show you that one because whilst the RGB stuff within raster is very sexy and very powerful, and I'm sure will be very useful by a number of people on this call, the ability to do this sort of stuff is now enhanced. And this is something else I'd suggest looking at, is converting those really big polygon maps of yours or even other types of data sets into a raster and actually trying to use everything within raster to really help speed up the way you process your data sets. Crikey.